All right. Hello, everyone. We are live here on Crowdcast. If you can hear us and see us, go ahead and shout out in the chat. We're super excited to be holding this for the Techstars Network and seeing so many Techstars founders and alumni in the chat. I see Italy, London, Buffalo, Pittsburgh. So awesome to have everyone here. And thank you so much for joining us on this short notice. We lost Jenny real quick, but we'll get her back. For this special edition AMA on fundraising during a tough market and tough circumstances. So as I try to find Jenny back online, Eamonn, do you want to go ahead and give a little bit of introduction?
For sure. Yeah. How's it going, folks? Good to see. Well, amazing to see so many of you on here, and welcome to my kitchen or the adjunct office of Techstars London, as is the case now. It's Jenny back again. So yeah, delighted to see all of you here. Hopefully, I saw some people saying they were 10 days in isolation, some that were 7 days. So hopefully, people are doing well, that your families and people around you are healthy as well. We wanted to do this AMA for a couple of reasons, right? Like we get a lot of requests from different people asking for support and help in different ways. And obviously one of the biggest ones at the moment is exactly what's going on in the kind of investor community. So basically what we'll do today is Jenny and I will introduce ourselves. We have got loads of time to answer questions. So kind of somewhere down here, you can stick your questions. The comment section on the right hand side is a little bit more active. So if you put it in the ask a question section, it'll be a little bit easier for us to get through and upvote them. But we've got about an hour or so to get through them. And I'm sure if we run over, I'm more than happy to spend a bit more time chatting to people. So to kind of kick things off, the rationale for me sitting here. So my name's Eamonn. I run the Techstars London program. I've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. Previously ran our AB InBev program in New York and have been a Techstars mentor since 2013 and an angel investor in over 50 companies now across the US, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And a founder. So two which were moderate successes and one which was like a massive failure or kind of learning experience, which is the polite way of saying it. The first company I started was back in 2004, back home in Ireland. And we were effectively a company that said yes to other people's requests. So an agency business that built stuff for big corporates. So websites, mobile apps when J2ME was still a thing before even iOS and Android existed. And so worked with lots and lots of big corporates and scaled the business out of Ireland into the UK over kind of 2004, 2005 and 2006. Weirdly did some work out in Korea as well. And for those of you who remember, the kind of financial crisis started to kick in, or certainly the writing started appearing on the wall the back end of 2007 and then through 2008, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Ireland in particular was hit really badly. The UK hit pretty badly as well. And we went through a situation where effectively over the course of 6 months, about 80% of our revenue disappeared. So clients were not renewing contracts. In some cases, people didn't pay their bills. In some cases, some of our clients went bankrupt. So it was a very difficult time. We had to lay people off. We had to, try and be nimble. We had to do as many things as we could ourselves. We had to deal with our own challenges with banks and short-term loans that we had and various different things. So an incredibly stressful period. And so I have a lot of empathy with what I'm sure many of you are feeling at the moment. I say it kind of as a joke, but it's also true that I could probably draw you a inch perfect map of the roof of my bedroom from that I slept in at that stage, because you were just waking up in the middle of the night, kind of looking at the ceiling going, how are we going to make this work? Are we going to be able to make payroll? Are we going to be able to help people out? So I think two things that kind of lessons learned for me from that period were, I think the first one is kind of over communicate. And I think that goes kind of across the board. So, certainly from our perspective, we over communicated with staff. So, everyone is feeling uncertain and nervous, and everyone is probably reading Twitter and, getting information from the media that's saying good, bad, and indifferent things. And your colleagues are no different. And lots of people will be worrying about their jobs and their futures. And I think the more that you can be transparent and let them know that, there may be cuts and pay cuts, and that you as a founding team should ideally be leading from the front in that regard. I think you'll be surprised if you do that at how many people say, yes, I'm willing to take a cut. Yes, I want to stay working with the organization. Yes, I want to stay involved. So I think over communicating with your team is important. And when it gets to the point, and hopefully it won't for any of you, but if it gets to the point that you have to lay people off, then I think use the network that you're part of through Techstars, use the networks that you have around you. One of the things that we try to do is make sure that as many colleagues as possible ended up getting interviews and opportunities at other places, because obviously we didn't want people to end up in very bad situations. I think likewise, over communicate with anyone who is paying you, so any clients or users or others. We were able to talk to some people who owed us money and get smaller amounts of money from them rather than getting none. We saw some interesting partnership opportunities open up as a result. So over communicating with clients and customers is never a bad thing, because you will be surprised at what comes out of it. And I think for those of you going through programs now or alumni, like over communicate with us, right? I say to companies all the time that I can try and help you with 100% of the things that I know about. I can't help you with any of the things that I don't. And so the more that we know in advance that things are going well or badly or otherwise, the more that hopefully we can help. I think the other thing I would say is be nimble. So as our business kind of tanked effectively in Ireland and the UK, we had an opportunity to open up an office in Dubai. And I think because we were a little bit smaller, a little bit leaner, and looking for kind of opportunities, and still obviously very hungry, we took that. We started building our own products out there. So iOS and Android travel guides for the Arabic-speaking markets, and working with lots and lots of other people out there. And the financial crisis, thankfully, had not quite hit that part of the world quite as much. And through that kind of nimbleness, opened up an opportunity for us to end up selling the business out there. So I think had we not been open to trying things, even in the most difficult circumstances, the outcome would have been very different. But certainly it was, I think a lesson learned in terms of just taking some opportunities that are in front of you and still being willing to take risks where you've kind of adequately thought about them. So just my 2 cents worth. As also as the saying goes, this shall pass, right? I think there have been a number of kind of bumps along the way over the last couple of decades, and I think this is no different. I think it's a black swan event. No one saw this coming, and it's going to be very challenging. But I think the far side of it, there will be great companies who go through this period and come out on the far side, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to support you through that. So Jenny, hand over to you to share your story.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'm seeing so many, friendly faces and names in the chat. It's really awesome. Over, 300 people on the Techstars network are on this. So that's actually making me feel really good, especially because, what I really think our strength is at Techstars is being a network. And, this is one of the advantages we have over, other groups, is that like we are a really tight-knit community. We've got a lot of resources and we're really here for you. So whether it's the managing directors, people like Casey on the marketing team, like we're all kind of banding together to help. And so, to echo Eamonn's sentiment, definitely reach out, like be proactive, be communicative with people here and, in the communities that you're part of. So, so I started a company in 2006. I'm kind of an accidental entrepreneur in that, I had a problem that I saw that I was like passionate about solving. I didn't really know and hadn't even think I'd heard of the term venture capital or really thought about, a scalable startup, versus kind of a small business. So ended up starting a company in 2006. We ended up raising from some angels, and those angels were people that kind of knew us and believed in us as a team. But I don't think we ever, we really weren't thinking about venture. And so we ran it very lean, and kind of from the beginning, it was almost like a bootstrap business. We were in the mobile space, in the kind of international telco space, and we were actually making money from day one. So that was helpful. And so we're running the business, and then we start kind of hearing people say, like, you guys should raise money and you should really build this out. And the kind of like, it got in our head that just like, the only way to grow this was to raise capital, which was kind of interesting. So in 2007, I went out to Silicon Valley to try to raise capital, because in New York City, there really wasn't any. And people said, if you're going to scale this, you've got to take money from VCs out west. So we spent about a month out there meeting with investors and trying to figure out if there were people that really believed in this business. We definitely got a bunch of interest, and we're kind of in the midst of negotiating term sheets. And you guys know kind of what happened then, right? So Lehman collapses, and all of a sudden the world goes into kind of turmoil, and we were really caught off guard. So I think the big learning for me is that, obviously, these things are really hard to anticipate, but we'd done so much planning around growth. We'd really we built our models, we built our metrics. We were always talking about how to build this, in a massive way. We hadn't really thought about what's worst case scenario. What if we have to go back to bootstrapping? How do we run this business? Oh my gosh, we have 50 employees. And so we had done no planning. And so I guess my big takeaway from that was, have a plan in place and really think about the kind of what we call downstream impacts, right? And so we were selling minutes to people that were calling internationally. It actually turned out to be pretty good for our business, because in bad times, people pick up the phone, it turns out, but we had no idea if that was going to be the case. So when you think about what you should do, it's not just about reducing expenses, but you've got to expect changes to top line revenue, and you have to kind of model this out as a high and low case, because you don't actually know. It actually turned out to be good for our business, and it might be really great for many of your businesses. And so, but you have to really kind of think about all the people, how your customers are impacted. So I suggest, create a new financial plan with, some assumptions that revenue will drop. And that was the big learning, is that we didn't do that at all. We were totally caught off guard. And the second big learning I had, and I think, Eamonn, spoke to it as well, which was, we actually had a community. We had advisors, we had some angel investors, there were other startups that we were friendly with, but we didn't reach out to any of them. So we thought that this was we were in isolation, and that this was a crisis that we were dealing with. And I'm not really sure why. So I think back in 2006, when I started the company, we didn't even use the term mentors. When you talked about, maybe there were advisors and most of them were paid or something. It was kind of a different world. But, my big learning from that after that was there's a lot of people that can support you. There are a lot of people that have gone through now, the .com bust of 2001, 2008, even September 11th and that, that Black Swan event. So, there are a lot of great people out there who've gone through. And so, my big kind of takeaway and learning for myself is reach out. And that's one of the reasons I'm trying to do a lot of these. I'm trying to, be part of other people's groups. I think this is a great time to get really communicative with your stakeholders, with your employees, with your customers, but really with mentors, advisors, and other startups. So I'd love for you guys to put questions in the Q&A. So just keep on adding those questions, but I'm going to start out just because I'm really curious, and you're kind of on the ground there, Eamonn. Love to hear just very briefly, what you're feeling in Europe right now.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like obviously we're just getting into the kind of heavy quarantine kind of lockdown type of scenario here in London. I know some people are in other parts of the continent where that's been going on for a little bit, or in some cases a lot longer. I think similarly to other parts of the world, the angel ecosystem here is very much in a kind of wait and see mode, and is in a state of, I suppose, psychological fragility. A lot of angel investors have seen their own portfolios go down pretty substantially in the markets over the last couple of days. So we're certainly seeing a refocus from angels into their existing portfolios. So if I look at the most frequent comments that I'm getting back from from companies who are raising at the moment and who are looking for kind of new investors, new angel investors. Most of them are saying, look, at least for the next kind of month, maybe even 6 weeks, everything is going to be focused on the existing portfolio, and then we can start making kind of decisions when the dust potentially has settled a little bit more. And that's even the case here in the UK, where there are pretty generous kind of tax incentive schemes for early stage investors to put capital into companies. So people are definitely adopting a bit of a wait and see approach for the most part. I think there are some ultra high net worth angels who are still deploying, and they see this as a little bit of an opportunity. So they're kind of thinking, okay, valuations have probably gone down, pricing has probably gotten a little bit more to a level that they consider sensible. Companies are being a little bit more prudent with their budgets and with their runway. So that side of things is still going, but again, decision making process is taking time. And on the VC side of things, I think some of the bigger, more established players are still actively investing, and we have some companies that are kind of going through closings at the moment. But I think we've also heard that there are one or two companies who have done, and for those of you who don't know, the way that VCs work is frequently if they have $100 million fund, they don't have all of that money sitting in a bank account. They have to do capital calls on a quarterly basis to draw it down, or in some cases on a per deal basis. So we heard the first story of a capital call default last night, where there was a seed deal. The fund went to their LPs to get the capital, and the LP said no, that the money now has to just go on insider deals for the time being. So definitely a mood of caution. I think talking, and outside of Techstars, I run a kind of deal flow email, and which is about 800 VCs and angels around the world, and a Slack group with hundreds of them on there as well. And the dominant mood is kind of everyone is cautious. I think the VCs are still looking to deploy. It's just going to take them more time to do it. The due diligence is going to be longer. The deal sizes maybe slightly smaller, and certainly they have a strong preference for the kind of insider rounds now. And companies are reacting to that. We're certainly seeing a lot of $3 million, companies who were doing a $3 million raise who are now doing $1 million and cutting their cloth to measure. So yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing on the ground over here. Curious, is it different? Are you seeing any different dynamics in the US or in New York more specifically?
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, obviously the US is a big place, but we started hearing about Seattle, and I think that walking around New York, I mean, this was maybe last week, walking around New York, bars, restaurants, everything packed, business almost as usual, like people talking about it, but it kind of took this like extra wave to get to the East Coast. And like, definitely now it's here. I mean, anyone who's in New York knows that everyone's home, that restaurants and bars are now mostly closed except for takeout. And, it's pretty much all anyone can talk about or think about. So it was interesting to see kind of that lag. And obviously, folks in Asia are, a few weeks ahead of us. So, it's interesting to see these waves where you kind of know it's coming, but even though like intellectually you know it because you don't feel it on the streets, it's like kind of hard to process, right? Like the sun was out, it's like beautiful weather in New York, people at restaurants, and you're like, okay, how is this really happening? So now it's definitely here. I think panic has set in. I've spoken to a number of angels and kind of high net worth individuals who invest, and everyone has pretty much said, we're going to watch this and see how it goes. So I think at the early stage, there's a kind of wait and see. And I've had really mixed things on the seed side. So many investors that I talk to are nervous. And as you mentioned, their capital could be at risk as well. I have a company in my last class, and they just got a term sheet today. So, I think it's going to be really mixed, and we can kind of dig into the specifics, but I'd say it's people are nervous. I think like one of the questions I keep getting asked by founders as we're giving them advice to kind of close rounds if they can and keep, and take in capital is like, is it appropriate to be approaching investors right now? And it kind of feels like, there's a little bit of an etiquette moment of like, because the crisis just happened in New York this week, like, is it okay to reach out to investors? And I'm not sure there's one answer, but I think it's something, kind of worth discussing. I guess from my point of view, starting a new conversation with a new investor this week doesn't actually feel right. So I've been advising my portfolio founders to obviously, if you have conversations going, like continue those, but maybe focus on some other things this week around fundraising. And so, there's a lot of great resources on how to prep. Like this is a great, week to do a lot of your research, make sure your pipeline is, your investor pipeline's in good shape and all those things. But I'm really not doing any new intros this week. I've gotten a few founders saying, hey, can you connect me to those investors? And I'm trying to be sensitive to everyone, feeling really kind of upset and vulnerable this week.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. I mean, I think I think it's going to take time for people to adapt to the kind of new normal, and I guess a lot of people are kind of worried about family and friends and ramifications of what's happening in their home market. And I think that's why we're seeing this kind of zooming in and zeroing in on the existing portfolio, because I think people are starting to really think, okay, how do we, at least for the next, I would think until the back end of this month at a minimum, maybe a little bit longer, that is where a lot of the focus and effort and energy is going to go. And I think, I sent a couple of emails to friends of mine over the last couple of days just to try and gauge, how people were feeling about even getting kind of cold outreach or intros or any of that kind of stuff. And I think people are still in a headspace where they're, certainly in London and in the UK, everyone is kind of still trying to wrap their head around exactly what's going on. And so I think there is this kind of etiquette moment where you've got to think, okay, actually there's, so many people are worried, schools are closing, kids are working from home, people are still trying to figure out how to work from home. If Zoom is actually going to work on an ongoing basis with everyone dialing in, or will your broadband connection be good enough? So I think I would kind of push pause, take some guidance. And I think as kind of things start to settle down, as people start to open up a little bit more, then I think you can start to kind of engage with the network, get the right kind of intros, get the right warm intros in particular as well, because I think that's when things are going to be, I think, at their kind of optimal point. I think for now, as Jenny said, I'd be kind of like, are there ways that you can noodle around with your financial model? Can you build out a better investor pipeline? Can you do a little bit more research on some of the people that you want to get involved in the fundraising process? But I think, I would definitely hold off on kind of new introductions at this stage. But go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a question actually in the queue. Currently closing our pre-seed round, 80% done. Do you suggest I continue trying to close the round or wait before we continue? So in this case, I'd actually say, I think you should close the round. So hopefully if it's if it's a small round, you're collecting capital as you go, as opposed to waiting for a term sheet. So if you are collecting checks, I would try to, get them in the bank and close them as quickly as possible. If you're waiting for a term sheet, or you have that term sheet, but you're waiting for others to come, I would close that term sheet, go back to that investor and say, is it okay to close with a smaller amount, get that money in the bank. And then as other people come in, take that money. So if you have a term sheet, close it. Get that money in. I do think it's appropriate, if you're in the middle of a process, to kind of continue talking to investors that you've already talked to. But I think probably this week in particular, hard to initiate new conversations with people that you haven't been introduced to. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a good point in there as well around, the raise unfortunately isn't finished until the money is wired. Certainly we've and I've seen a lot of emails over the last couple of days of, where people have effectively confirmed, said yes, got as far as the docs, and at the at the 11th hour kind of said, actually, no, I can't do this. So I think taking the capital off the table that's available is going to stand you in good stead. And as Jenny said, potentially look at a rolling close or different ways to bring more in over time. But I think, the next couple of months are going to be mostly about, who can get to the back end of this year, who can get to kind of 2021 and, maintain the business and potentially grow it a little bit. And then I think we'll start to see way more VC activity opening up. But there's definitely quite a bit of uncertainty to go, I think.
So looking at the first question, we've answered, much about this. Have you spoken to VCs about changes in their investment strategy in light of the current uncertainty? Can you shed some light on what kind of dialogue is happening in the VC boardroom? That's from Marina. Thank you. Interestingly, I've been talking to a lot of VCs who are now really thinking strategically about what sectors they're interested in. So I think we're going to see, more people investing in future of work, and there's a lot of conversation, around remote tools. And so I think that's really, coming to the forefront. I also have heard, many VCs worried about, D2C, worried about direct to consumer, both from a supply chain point of view, and, how that's going to be slowed down, and then also consumer appetite. I think I'm a little bit mixed on that. I think as more of us are stuck at home, there's going to be a lot of online shopping that's happening. So, if we do go into a full recession, then, people will be obviously more cautious across the board, but that will be across the board of buying enterprise software just as much as, buying D2C. So I don't think we have any answers there yet, but I have heard, 3 or 4 VCs I've spoken to say that they're worried about their D2C portfolio. So maybe Eamonn, you've got some insights there too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the same thing that we're hearing. Although I think there are some companies in the kind of consumer space. There's a company going through Techstars Anywhere at the moment whose update I got that said that today, I think yesterday was they sold more yesterday than they had in the entire month of September last year. So I think for anyone who is doing kind of home delivery, direct to consumer food, lots of areas like that, there are still substantial opportunities, though it may take more time for people to fully realize that. I think the changes in the investing strategy, we're seeing kind of a bifurcation of deals where there are some companies, particularly in the kind of working from home or remote working or remote business space, where they'll set out to raise $1 million, and all of a sudden the next time you talk to them, it's like, oh, suddenly we're raising 4, or we've got commitments for 5. And so there are some deals that are just going absolutely stratospheric and through the roof. And then there are a bunch of others that are taking a little bit longer to get over the line because people are trying to assess and frequently, and this is no secret to many of you, when you go and talk to a VC, you're by far the smartest people in the room. So we on the investing side of things are trying to figure out exactly what kind of things are going to look like in the future as well. But certainly, hot deals, lots of money is still piling into them at an increasing rate, taking a little bit longer. And there may be more education that you have to do with investors to say, look, if this is a remote first world that we're moving towards, or if there are substantial changes that we're going to have to deal with in terms of lifestyle over the next 8 to 12 months, then here is how we are positioned. I think you've got to take them on a kind of narrative journey with you.
So, one of the things I'd love to spend a little time on is like, what are the opportunities that are going to arise from this? And so I've been spending, time with a lot of our portfolio companies, kind of thinking through, where can you get leverage, during this time? So as I mentioned, 2008, financial crisis, and I'm running a telco company where people are making international phone calls, on their mobile phone. It turns out that, in those times, people spend on calls, people spend on kids, people keep on spending on pets. Like, there are these kind of recessionary categories. But I think what's interesting, even if you're not necessarily in, a vertical that seems so obvious, is like, think about what your advantages can be. So I spoke to a portfolio company this morning. She has studios for a rowing studio with rowing machines, and they've obviously had to close that, which is a huge hit. But, about a year ago, she launched a video on demand platform. So obviously that's like a great arbitrage, and that business is doing well. But then just last week, she, not everyone has these rowers at home. And so what she did is her and her team got into the studio and they started filming some activities and exercises that you could do to kind of supplement your rowing. Even if you don't have a machine, you usually come to the gym for the class, but here are things you can do to keep in shape that, emulate some of those exercises. So they filmed that last week, and it's like doing really well. So I think, as Eamonn said, like thinking on your feet and staying nimble, one of the things that I think is great in these times is like, get creative, right? Think about what your strengths are and how you can kind of tap into into that and to really leverage it during these times. And I've really been talking to companies across the board, and we're coming up with like really creative, cool ideas to kind of add value to the community, to build community and customer loyalty, and also just to take advantage of some interesting opportunities. So yeah, any ideas on that, Eamonn, as well?
Yeah, I would agree. We've a company in the London portfolio, Pesky Fish, that's selling directly to restaurants, right? So they're B2C, but it's boat to chef, and obviously a lot of restaurants closing down at the moment, and likely to be kind of shuttered for a little bit of time in the foreseeable future. And so they're now looking at opportunities to deliver directly to people, right? People are not going to stop eating, so it may be a mild pivot from that more B2B to B2C model, and they're looking at ways also of partnering up with other businesses who are in a similar space, who are also obviously selling to restaurants, to go, okay, is there a way that we can aggregate the produce and products that we have available and make them available to a wider kind of consumer audience, and do delivery to door, at home. Likewise, we've got other businesses that are looking at kind of little minor pivots or bigger partnerships that they can kind of take advantage of at this stage. And I do think that there will be a lot of opportunities that start to kind of creep up. Again, it's going to take a couple of weeks for people to wrap their head around the kind of fallout for all of this, from both from a personal perspective and an economic perspective. But I do think that there is not going to be any downturn in the number of companies that want to partner with you. There's not going to be any decline in the number of opportunities that will start to present themselves, especially if you can kind of pivot your business slightly to go, okay, if we are dealing with remote first, if we are dealing with delivery to home, if we are dealing with pivoting to a kind of more online rather than offline business model, and I think there are substantial opportunities there for companies.
Yeah, so part of the theme here is really like running your business in tough times. And, something that, we've been talking to portfolio companies about is, the idea of you may have to, make cuts, you may have to, pare down, and kind of goes back to my original point, which is like, have a plan in place. Hopefully, you won't have to utilize it, but let's have a plan in place. And so, that really brings up this topic of like, when and how to, cut costs, but really thinking about, how to maximize every dollar. One strategy that I think is pretty effective is to really kind of think of the organization as a whole. You're probably, most people on this call, I think, are still, at the seed stage and running kind of smaller businesses. And so think about what it would mean for you as founders and your employees if you had to all kind of chip in so that you could extend runway. And so, that idea of, we're all going to take a 25% pay cut so that we can keep the lights on longer. And these are things that are obviously like devastating for the business, but they can be real bonding opportunities, and real, like, you have to think of it as this way for you to come together as a team to get through a really hard spot. So instead of just like, okay, we're going to cut our marketing person, that person's probably not going to be able to find a job right now, and that's going to put them in a vulnerable state. Really coming together as a team and supporting each other in a responsible way might be, everyone kind of buckling their belts a little bit. So that's just one learning that I've seen, or one thing that I've seen work well. And yeah, Eamonn, any other ones around kind of the fundamentals?
Yeah, I think, and a couple of people have asked around kind of talking to investors, what are some proven fundraising tactics, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you're going out and talking to people in this climate, and you can present them kind of like, look, this is what we were thinking about. Here's kind of the plan that we formulated now. Here are the, salary cuts that some people are taking. Here's the way that we're managing our burn a little bit more. Here's the way that we're cutting kind of budgets, but we're still actually going to be able to deliver from a kind of, an operational excellence point of view. I think that matters a lot. I think people being able to see, I think someone posted in the comments earlier, the kind of wartime CEO post that Andreessen had put up. I think Ab has just put up, Eric Paler from Founder Collective saying, in a crisis, your cash position is your shield. Like, that's equally true when you're talking to angel investors, when you're talking to VCs. If they can think, and this is something that even in the Techstars application process, we always look at is, what level of kind of systematic and structured thinking can this company or can this CEO do? Are they able to kind of look at things in a, this is a tough, decision that you're going to have to make in a tough financial model that you're going to have to do. But I think if you can start to, really systematically look at opportunities to kind of maybe trim costs a little bit here or there, maybe some people take pay cuts, and you've got to be obviously sensitive to, people's situations as you're kind of implementing that, because what's an easy pay cut for some people may be, vastly more difficult for others. So again, I think that's back to the over communication piece that I talked about earlier. But I think if you are starting to talk to angel investors, if you are talking to VCs, if you are having ongoing conversations with them at this time, like, don't be afraid to share with them, hey, this is how we're thinking about the kind of the new normal. This is how we're thinking about getting through to 2021. And it may involve, like, any projections that you may have made during program, or if some of you who've been there from I saw a few names from 2018 programs and before, your projections in terms of user growth and revenue and all of those things are probably going to be very different now. And I don't think anyone is going to kind of use that as a stick to beat you with. And if they do, they're an asshole. So I think you've got to kind of think about how you put this plan in place, how you explain that to people, both internally and investors. And yes, there will be some tough decisions to be made, but I think unfortunately that's kind of part of the journey as well.
I mean, I think this is a great opportunity to reach out. Like, it's been interesting for me. I have a portfolio of 130 companies. It's been interesting which founders have sent out messaging to their customers, to their investors, to their community, and who hasn't. I spoke with a founder this morning. She was going to send out her investor update, and she was like, "Oh, it's such a weird time. I think I'll send it out next week." And I was like, "No, send it out today. Like, you want to be thought of as a leader, and someone that's taking action." And you are taking action. She was doing like a lot of great things, but she was kind of hesitant to bother people. Like, don't be hesitant. Like, I would get out there and, really talk about what you're doing to put action in place. And I think that'll put you in a position of strength. Now, I see in the comments, do you think investors will be put off if we reach out to them for the first time right now? Yes. So I think what we're saying is that, like, existing relationships, lean in, investors, community, customers, like, reach out to those people. But I think particularly this week, it feels like, things have really come to the head, at least on the East Coast, that this is probably not a great week to reach out to people. As I said, I've told founders that I was going to take a pause on making introductions for the next few days because I'm trying to be sensitive to all of the investors who are mostly dealing with their portfolio, right? So again, I have a portfolio of 130 companies. I'm spending most of my time, talking to those founders, trying to be helpful. So I'm trying to extend that same courtesy. And I'm really hopeful this will not go on for an extended period and we can get back to business. But I think being sensitive around that this week in particular feels right.
I think an interesting comment on the side. So the founder of Simba, who's going through Techstars Anywhere, we manage remote internship programs and are gaining an insane amount of traction, which under the circumstances makes sense. We haven't begun a fundraising round, but could we close based off this traction and sign contracts with big name customers? We don't have the team power to serve all our inbound customers right now and would need to raise soon. I mean, I think that's an interesting question from the perspective of it goes back to what we were just talking about with, talking to new investors. I would think if you have some relationships with some of the mentors that you've met during Mentor Madness, if you've got some relationships with maybe existing investors or some folks in your local community, it might be an opportunity. Certainly what we're seeing for people who are kind of looking to quote unquote start around now is they're looking much more at a kind of a smaller bridge round with a big kind of pre-seed or seed round or Series A round in back end Q4 of this year, maybe even Q1 of next year. So I think if you can do kind of a bridge financing to get you through to there with people that you already know, then maybe gets you over the hump of having to start to build relationships at a time when I think maybe the door isn't fully open right now for investors taking fresh pitches. I think it'll take a couple of weeks for it to get back to that level of normality. Jenny, I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, for sure. I think just give it a little bit of time. I see an interesting question. New York is offering companies with less than 100 employees, zero interest loans of up to 75K. Would you discourage companies from taking short-term financing options like this? This is a great question. I think that in these times, you should look at all financing options, right? And especially if you're in verticals, there are certain verticals. Hard tech is something that, there's a lot of cool grants out there. There's a lot of government money. There's a lot of all types of access. If you're in healthcare, if you're in education, these are all areas where there is support. So although I can't speak specifically to this offering, and I'm happy to talk offline about this, Kobina, but I think in general, get creative and, look for non-dilutive capital, look for loans, access credit lines. These are all things that you probably have access to. And so we always, I think we've been living in the world of plentiful capital, and we just expect that the money is there. But for many years, there just wasn't venture capital in many places, and founders found a way, and they mostly found it through these alternative funding sources. So I would encourage you to track these down, and governments are trying to do their part as well.
Yeah, I think in Germany, there's something similar. I think in Sweden, the government has brought in something. In the UK, there are Innovate UK grants available. And I know some substantial amount of lobbying going towards the government to see if there are ways to kind of extend benefits or loans or grants to companies. I think, so long as you're not taking on a personal guarantee or anything like that, then I think it's a really good way to go for it. And certainly, kind of any grant funding that is available, I would imagine that we will start to see some of the timelines and processes for that start to be truncated a little bit, because I think people recognize that VC funding is not necessarily going to be as freely available for the next little while. So I think there will be increased government support for small businesses, and certainly no shortage of people on either side of the Atlantic or elsewhere in the world calling for a more substantial amount of that to be dedicated towards SMEs, startups, restaurants, everything else. So I think definitely some opportunities for folks there.
Yeah, there's a great question. What's a tactful way to reach out to customers that you're in the middle of a sales cycle with? So this is a great question, because, the truth is, I think acting, there's so much uncertainty in all sides. And so it's really hard to know the answer here. But my advice is really kind of act with empathy towards that person as opposed to pressure. Right. So if you're kind of pressuring them to move things through a funnel, they're probably going to delete that email because they've got a lot of fires. If you are providing empathy, that you understand that this is a tough time, and that, potentially if there's anything that you can do to help or support, I think that's a reassuring message. So I think, just going with kind of the right sentiment and tone will make all the difference in this time. I find it a little jarring. Sometimes I'm getting emails and people are just getting right into it. And I feel like in these times, we need to kind of come together and just say, acknowledge that other person is probably stuck in their house, or, whatever it is, that these are tough times. And I think that etiquette goes a long way. When I see an email that says hey, Jenny, hope you're doing okay. I know things in New York are really tough. Love to continue the conversation around, applying to Techstars, that feels a lot better. So I don't know, that's my personal take, but I think it's fine to reach out, but just try to kind of think about what they're going through a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Be aware that everyone is going through their own journey. Certainly 2008 and 2009, when we had companies that were unable to pay us in some cases, and certainly a lot who were unwilling to pay us. They were all going through their own, in many cases, really shitty journey that, they were having to lay people off. They were going through different processes. At the end of the day, regardless of whether it's a huge corporate or a tiny company, everyone is a human being and has their own way of dealing with this. And I think, one thing that I say to companies all the time is try and A, see it from the other person's point of view, B, try and be as personalized as possible. What I absolutely hate, and I got a bunch of them this morning, it's a switch went off somewhere in a direct sales company, but it was loads of people trying to pitch me recruitment services and various different things, but just with really slightly brash kind of non-personalized emails, and you instantly just hit delete on them. I think this is an opportunity for you to show empathy, and hopefully one where that empathy will be reciprocated. And it goes to something which Yaka asked, saying, we're in the gastronomy industry. We've recently onboarded a couple of restaurants and bars as content clients. That's part of our revenue. Given what they're going to go through, how human or generous should we be with extending payments or not even collecting payments? I think people have a very long memory when it comes to stuff like this. And certainly my experience of trying to be as helpful as I could with folks that we worked with in 08 and 09 and even beyond, it goes an awful long way. I would say kind of either extend payment deadlines, see if there is a way where your runway will allow you to kind of, forgive 50, 80, 90, 100% of the revenue that they owe you. Then I think that wouldn't be a bad way for you to build a relationship that is definitely going to be an awful lot stronger when things come back on the far side. Because if you're a restaurant owner or a bar owner, right now, certainly in this country, the government hasn't formally ordered the bars and restaurants to close, so they cannot collect any insurance payments, and so therefore they're facing a very, very bleak future, which many of them will have personal guarantees on. So I think the more that you can be friendly towards them, the more that you can build your relationship with them, the more that you can help them, and the more that you can show empathy to them, the more that you will build your reputation, not just with the clients that you have now, but with a broader kind of spectrum of folks in the community. I think that's definitely the way to go, and a great answer in that from Simon Perryman as well. I think it's exactly the right way to do it.
So Kartik has a question. What advice would you give to in-program and alumni companies on how best to use the newsletter in this new normal? So for anyone who doesn't know, Techstars encourages founders to send updates to their investors and to their mentors, et cetera. I think, as we stated before, like, this is a great opportunity. As I said, that founder that called me and said she wasn't sure she wanted to send out an email seemed like a weird time. I mean, this is the time to get active, to get communicative. And so the advice I would give is send it. Don't be discouraged around sending it. And be honest, right? Like, your metrics are going to be uncertain. Your metrics potentially are going down depending on what your on what your business is, but that transparency, I think, will build a lot of trust. So definitely send it. And then I think, again, get creative, figure out what the positives are. And even if those positives won't come to fruition in the next, week or two, because things are kind of shut down, like, start architecting what that narrative can be around a positive outcome here, right? And start kind of socializing that with your mentors, with your investors. How do people feel about that? So that's what I would say.
I think that
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I'll get.
I was going to say, I think that ties in nicely with a question from David, asking kind of what are some proven fundraising tactics that adapt to this economic downturn. I think definitely the newsletter is one. There are some investors who say that they don't read newsletters. I read as many of them as I physically can. I think it's an incredible data point, and it's that kind of Mark Suster thing of lines, not dots, that I think is really important for people to understand. I think being able to tell, still having a strong narrative about your business, a strong story for, why this is a great company, this is a great team, this is a great product, being able to demonstrate market demand, particularly if you can demonstrate market demand, some degree of growth, or even some degree of kind of increased retention during tough times. I think all of the kind of, the regular indicators that show investors that this is a great business are still these ones. But I think, to the point that we made earlier, I think it's really, really important to be able to tell people how you're going to adapt to the fact that this may not be 1 or 2 weeks of isolation. And I think Brad asked a question about this, which we can touch on. Like, this may not be 1 or 2 weeks and everything kind of gets back to normal. This may be, a multi-month or multi-quarter, epidemic that we don't know the outcome of yet. So I think, being able to kind of keep the communication going, being able to show people that you have sensible thought processes and systematic processes, and also that, you have a viable business, I think is still very strong. Jenny, I'm not sure if you'd add anything there.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm moving on to one that's catching my eye, which says, from Guillermo, how do you feel about hiring new people without meeting in person for the next couple of weeks or months? So 2 parts to this question. One, how do I feel about hiring people without meeting in person? I am a real in-person person. Like, people know that most of the companies, almost all the companies that have come through Techstars, that have come through my programs, I've made a point to meet in person. So this is going to be a real reset for me personally as I adapt to getting to know people in that interpersonal way online. So I think that we're all going to have to reset, and this is a great time to do that. I think the bigger, more concerning issue is I don't feel good about you hiring anyone right now. So I'm sorry to say this, but this is this is really not a great time. And so I think everyone needs to put hiring on hold for a few weeks. And I'm feeling really confident that we're going to be able to get back to it, keep these people warm, but I would not recommend hiring people right now. I think everyone just needs to kind of take a moment. So how do you feel about that? I mean, I imagine people are going to have strong feelings about that, Eamonn.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, and I think someone asked the question a little while ago about kind of, are you spending more time talking to founders now versus before the pandemic? I think definitely a lot more time at the moment. I think probably most investors are in a similar position where, as the kind of the shit hits the fan, people start kind of narrowing in their focus on the folks that they're kind of communicating with. So certainly a lot more conversations with founders, and some of them have been around for the companies who did raise kind of back end of last year or kind of Q1 of this year. What should that kind of hiring strategy look like? The best answer I can come up with is trying to push pause on it, unless it is someone who is absolutely amazing and you have sufficient capital in the bank to bring them in and you think that they're going to be able to make a disproportionate impact in light of everything that's going on. I would generally kind of be pushing pause on anything unless it's like your CTO is leaving and you need to bring in a new one, or you have something kind of essential like that, or you have sufficient money in the bank. But in general, right now, the advice that I've been giving to most people is just push pause on it for a little bit of time, because we don't know what the far side of this is going to look like yet. Someone asked the question earlier, what does this look like compared to the financial crisis? So for people about to launch and focus on B2B, what advice would you give them? How do you see the comparison between now and the financial crisis from a startup's perspective? The financial crisis had a number of macroeconomic factors that came into play, and so you could see the upside and the far side of that. I think one of the challenges here is we don't know how long it's going to be before there is a vaccine. We don't know what the optimal kind of mitigation strategy is for the virus. And so while some of us have been in quarantine or lockdown for a couple of days, some of us are only starting. Some of us, I know we have Ping on the call from Taiwan, where it's starting to look a little bit more like back to normal over there. It is still uncertain as to exactly what's going to happen and if or when there will be a second wave. So I think being prudent in terms of hiring, being prudent in terms of the capital that you have, being prudent in terms of the money that you're able to take off the table, potentially from some insiders or from investors, is probably the best strategy at this stage. And certainly for people who are focused on B2B, what advice to give them? I think, people are still going to continue to buy software. People are going to continue to buy products. I think you've probably got to think about the storyline that you're selling people. So are you helping them save money? Are you helping them make money? Are you contributing in various different ways to the business? Are you giving them more time or more access? Or so what is the kind of fundamental human need that you're answering, and how do you kind of sell that potentially in light of everything that's going on? And I think to Jack's answer to your question as well, I think if you're in a business in the travel industry or in the hospitality industry in particular, I think you've got to be able to kind of have a very frank conversation about, well, we're thinking about doing a small pivot to online to allow us to generate revenue now, or we're thinking about taking X, Y, and Z measures to support the company in the short term before we're able to maybe deploy a longer term business model. I think those are some things that I would think about if you're just getting ready to kind of do pre-launch. And I would really focus on kind of making the most of the relationships that you have right now, and then as things start to open up a little bit more, you can start to get in touch with some of the new ones.
Great. Okay, so if Corona is stopping our growth, should we keep on fundraising or wait? Again, I think we've talked about this a few times, but I would just start communicating with those investors on the actions that you're taking. So the why, right? So I'm always suspect when I get a founder update or, something, and they tell me, all the fluffy stuff and none of the metrics, right? They were pitching at this competition and this is going great. I want to know, what do the metrics look like? And so I think, stand behind those metrics and just get ahead of it, right? This is what's happening right now. This is the steps we're taking to mitigate it. We're watching and seeing like everyone else, but these are the things that we've put in place internally and externally to make sure our customers and the community are happy and are getting good information, right? So if you can wait, obviously. If you can bootstrap and if you can cut costs and extend runway, this is not the best time to fundraise. But if you're in the middle of a fundraise, then, carry on and, just explain what's going on in a really transparent way. As I said, literally a founder this morning from my last batch got a term sheet, right? So it is happening. Her business will be impacted like any other business. So it's really about keeping that open communication.
Yeah, and I think that's an important message to get across as well. Like, we're certainly seeing financings going through and term sheets coming through, and there are businesses growing and scaling, and great things are happening for a lot of people. I think that no one has pushed the stop button on the world. So I think that will continue to happen. As people start to get a little bit more clarity, we will start to see more angel capital coming through. We will start to see more VCs deploying. We will start to see, but it will take many months to get to that point, and maybe even a little bit longer. And so I think there was a question related to what we were talking about with hiring. What if your team needs to hire more people to support your inbound? So should you hire on a contract basis? And I think that's back to the kind of remote interns topic that we were talking about earlier. So obviously a lot of demand for that business. So should they be thinking about maybe bringing in a couple of contractors to manage that? Should that be something that is a function of revenue or a function of fundraising? Kind of how would you advise people on that, Jenny?
That's a tough one. I think I think it's case dependent, right? So I think it's hard on these calls to give across the line advice, but I think there will be cases where you do need to increase your team and and change things around. So I think reach out to people individually and try to get some feedback on that. But agree with you, there are cases.
I think you can, on a case-by-case basis. I think another really good question on the right-hand side here. So for companies who are going to start Techstars during this uncertain time, how do we get the maximum benefit from the network and from the program? And conscious, obviously, that a lot of founders are now going to be coming into Techstars and doing a virtual program in particular. So I think lots of different opportunities to come up for people as a result of doing that, and an opportunity to do more things like this, more webinars, more access to the wider community. I know certainly some of the companies going through Techstars Lisbon, they've been able to tap into international mentors as well as the ones that are normally coming through from Lisbon. So I think for companies coming into Techstars, I think number one, you're joining an incredible network of other founders, other companies, potential partners, investors, and lots of other people. I think one of the other big things is that as we get back to capital being deployed into companies, whether it be from angels or VCs, I think a lot of people are going to start looking for a stamp or a seal of approval, right? They're going to want to look for companies where they feel like maybe some of the lifting in terms of due diligence has been done, or where kind of some pre-validation has been done. And so the fact that you have gotten through hundreds of applications or more and been one of the 10 selected for your program is massive validation. And I think that network that we have of people who are on hand to support you, be they mentors or investors further down the line, is going to be absolutely invaluable, and still every bit is available to you if you're doing a program virtually or if you're doing it in person. So I think, make sure that you're communicating.
I would just add that, my calendar is actually free this week and next. I was supposed to be on many trips that are not happening. So people have time, people are home, people are glued to their computers. So this is a great time to tap into the network. There's many mentors, there's many people that want to support founders. So I think this is an interesting time to kind of lean in, whether you're going into a Techstars program or you're coming out of one, or you're just part of the network in some way. There's a lot of people on this call. There's so many MDs and community people on this call right now, right? And these are all people that are offering to help. So this is an incredible group to tap into. So here's a really interesting question, and it's not one that I actually have a great answer to, but when does a larger product company pivot due to economic or social turmoil, i.e. a recession, et cetera? Is that reactive or being short-sighted versus visionary, geared towards longer-term success, and what's the balance? I mean, that's a really interesting question. I guess I would say right now, thank you, Millie, for that. Right now, I think, dramatic changes to your business are probably unnecessary, but putting a plan in place is necessary, right? So I think because things are literally happening day by day, and things are changing, that, to completely pivot in this moment would probably be not the right thing, and be very reactionary. That said, if you can envision when I always think of like on the slide deck, the why now slide, if you can envision your why now slide of like where you think the world is going, what's that unique insight that you have that you are going to be able to pivot into and capitalize on, like that's an interesting moment. But I would just kind of give it a little bit of time. Eamonn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose it also depends on the extent of the pivot. So I think if it's the kind of business model pivot, or if it's a minor one where you're still doing something conceptually similar or adjacent to what you were originally doing, then I think it potentially makes sense. I think if it's a whole scale pivot, it can be a little bit more difficult. And I think the other big thing is to, again, kind of come back to that storyline or that narrative or that, we moved from being a services business in 2004 through 8 effectively, or most of 8, to being a product development company. And that was just because actually there was very few people paying for services anymore. So we had to kind of build our own stuff and think about a different model. And obviously that led to a good outcome for us. But we were still building fundamentally kind of very similar products to what we were doing before. We just weren't doing them on behalf of a large brand or organization. So I think it ultimately comes down to, if you're doing a pivot and you're going to go and talk to customers, talk to investors, or talk to other people, the rationale behind that and the story that you tell them is going to be something that's really important. But to Jenny's point, I would say, kind of don't make rash decisions. Make sure you talk to as many people as possible, get as much feedback about the current situation and what your new plan is, and then use that to kind of make a decision.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to wrap up. Someone, Jack asked, how much time are we spending with our portfolio, versus other things. Like, I'm spending 80% of my time talking to my portfolio, doing AMAs like this. Both Eamonn and our applications are actually open. Mine for the summer, his for the fall. So I am spending some amount of time talking to founders that are thinking about going into the program. But really just trying to kind of create more resources. I feel like we're in the thick of this right now. And, the most important thing is helping founders get through in these hard moments.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap it up from my side, I think Keith Lynn has made a great point to say, look, don't forget to reach out to mentors, fellow founders, even if it's just to have a chat. As much as you might think they have a lot going on, and everyone does, I think a lot of people will really be supportive, be engaged, be happy to have conversations. Everyone is going through their own version of what's going on in the outside world at the moment, and no one has the definitive or full answer. But sometimes actually just having a conversation about stuff, it could be anything. Talk about a book, talk about a movie. Like, don't talk about coronavirus for a little while. It was like when Brexit was happening here, you had to ban conversation about it. But I think have conversations. Like, I think it was interesting, and Jenny, you tweeted about this the other day. For a long time, I've always dreaded my phone ringing unless the phone call was scheduled, because it always makes me think it's going to be bad news. But actually, the last 2 or 3 weeks, the phone has rang way more often, right? And it is a lot more people are being communicative. A lot more people are reaching out. A lot more people are saying, hey, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What should I do? And I think you have this incredible network of founders and MDs and people across the community. This is just a snapshot of it. Like, make use of it, have those conversations, because it will definitely pay dividends, and you will have some incredible conversations with great people. So yeah, feel free to reach out if we can help.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Jenny and Eamonn for jumping on so quickly and lending your expertise and time. I am sure we're going to have a lot more of these. We had over 400 people watching and, also wanting to know and learn from each other. So thank you, everyone. There is a green follow button at the top of your screen if you want to stay tuned for our next events. Like I said, our team is going to be planning a lot more of these in the coming weeks and months. And also follow us on social where we announce all of them. We'll have Jenny and Eamonn put their info and where you can find them in the chat if they'd like. And we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.